Hi, I'm Tyler with the Econ Tutoring Center, and today we're going to be talking about banks and their balance sheets. So, what's on a balance sheet? It's the assets and liabilities. So, assets is what they have, and liabilities is what they have, are liable for, what they have to pay out. So, somebody comes in and deposits $250 million into the bank. Okay, so that's now a liability for them. Somebody gave them $250 million, they have to give it back if they ask for it. So it's a liability. But now they have this $250 million, they can do some things with it. So there's a reserve requirement ratio, which means that they have to keep some fraction of this $250 million on hand, just in case they come back and ask for some of it. Right now we're going to use 10% because it's a little bit easier, but usually it's a lot lower than that. So let's just say right now that the reserve requirement ratio, I'm just going to write it down here, equals 10%. And so they have to keep 10% of this, which is $25 million, in cash on hand, which is an asset. And then the rest of that, the other $225 million, is kept in excess reserves, and that's what they can use to buy bonds from the government or loan out to businesses or hold in cash. They don't have to spend it, or not spend it, but they don't have to loan it out or buy bonds with it, but it's the most that they can. So that's 225. And when we tally up the balance sheet, we get the deposits, so our liabilities equal 250 million. And our assets equal 250 million. So the balance sheet equals. So now that we know how this balance sheet works, let's introduce some problem into it. So let's just say that this person comes in and withdraws $10 million. So now deposits go down to $240 million because somebody's taken $10 million away from $250 million. So what happens now? Required reserves go down because now they're only required to keep 10% of 240, which is 24. And then that means that now there's less in the excess reserves too. So 240 minus 24 is 216. And then when we add this down to the same thing here, it's a little bit easier on the liability side. So that equals 240 million. We add these two together. Hopefully it'll equal 240 million, and it does. And so the bank just ends up, so when the bank loses $10 million from deposits, somebody withdraws $10 million, liabilities go down by $10 million, required reserves go down by 1, and excess reserves go down by 9. So on the balance sheet, this seems pretty easy, but when you're one of these banks and you had $225 million loaned out, like we had before, and then now you only have $216 million to loan out, what can you do? You can't just take back those $9 million from people you've already loaned out, so we've got a problem here. So what can the banks do to solve this? They can either attract new deposits, so they can say, they might raise interest rates on a nice little checking account thing and try and get $10 million back in the deposits. Or they might call up another bank and say, hey, can I borrow $9 million really quick? Or they might borrow it from the Fed. It's a problem for the banks when people withdraw the money like that, and then they have to figure out how to make this balance sheet work when they have $225 million of loans out. But there's a couple ways that they can do it, and the system seems to work pretty well. Alright, so I hope that helps you understand banks and their balance sheets a little bit better and what happens, when things start messing on each side. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thanks.